Well, good afternoon, everyone. We are glad to have you again for this month's Church Facility Management Solutions webinar. We are so thankful that you're able to attend, especially on this topic. This one should be near and dear to everyone because we're talking about energy management and ministry. And last I checked, we're all paying a bill to some type of energy company, electric, gas, and otherwise. So this is a little different presentation in the sense that there's a lot of good technical information, but fortunately you don't have to listen to me try to stumble through it. Joining us today is Mr. Colby May, and Colby, welcome. Thank you for being our expert on this. And if you wouldn't mind, just go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself and your company, please.
You got it. Again, my name is Colby May. I am a certified energy manager. Basically, it means I'm certified to manage energy. I've done about 5,000 energy audits across the U.S. And make a long story short, we had a contract with the State Energy Conservation Office of Texas, and with that, they paid for our firm at the time to do audits at every school district across Texas. There's 1,100 independent school districts across Texas, and many of them, like Houston, have 300 campuses. So obviously, with that experience, got a heart, and I was able to see a lot of value of the way we were able to manage energy. Well, fast forward 10 years, really felt a strong call to go to seminary up in Boston at Gordon Conwell. And with that, I did my thesis in Congo during the Kivu conflict. And not to say too much, but became really passionate about the local church. Because in regards to missions, I'm also a missions pastor at my church. But if you want to change the hands of a perverted culture, you have to change the heart. And in order to change the heart, in our opinion, investing into the local church is the way to go. So that's kind of the background where I came from. I started LIT, or lit.church is the website, as a means to leverage energy management, and I'll describe that more, but to leverage energy management as a means to fund missions, because you're giving it to the utility company anyways. Is it possible for us, through changing the way we behave, and you don't have to spend money to save money, but is it possible to through energy efficiency, to redirect and good stewardship from the utility to the bottom line, which is, church missions, church ministry, et cetera. So that's the whole heartbeat and why we started LIT.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for that. Before we jump in and we start running this thing and going through the slides, just as a general note, remember, if you have questions, send those questions via the question pane. I will monitor those. I'll answer what I can. And when we get the opportunity, at the end, we'll have a Q&A. This one is, again, a little more technical, so we'll go through these slides, but we will make them available at the end, and will have that question and answer period. So without further ado, as we go through, let's just go through it and we'll start. So I will advance, and I'm doing the slides, so guys, bear with me, just like Colby is. He'll tell me when to go forward. So all right, Colby, I'll give it over to you.
Okay, great. So kind of as I stated about energy management and facility management, our heart is to work with energy managers and facility managers in this intersection of faith and energy management. Mostly we're working with facility managers, and when we work with facility managers, uh, something to keep in your mind as we go forward, kind of keep in the back of your mind. And maybe I'm talking to some facility managers right now, or maybe you wear that hat to some degree. But facility managers wear a number of different hats. So as a result, they're more in reactive mode versus proactive mode. Our heart is, how can we use facility and energy management to make their job more of a proactive mode? So we want to impact missions through facility management, through energy management. So let me throw some quick facts, financial church facts. Go next slide. In the U.S., we tithe around $50 billion per year. That's Protestant and Catholic churches combined. And of the 50 billion, go ahead, 1 billion or 2% a year spent on missions. And there's a lot of different facts about that. I don't have time to share them all. But of the 20%, typically our second biggest budget item is the money we spend on our utility bill, and even M&O, or maintenance and operations of our building. That's 20%. So what if, another fact is, according to the EPA, 30% of the energy we use is wasted, which means, and again, I've done 5,000 of these and I'm a big believer in it, we can recapture energy use through no cost behavior change. And if we did that, and if we lived in a perfect world, we could triple missional giving, missional impact. And what would that do for the church, and what would that do for global missions? So that's part of the mindset that we come from. It's, hey, we're spending it anyways. Let's use good stewardship and redirect. And the rest of this presentation is really to focus and hone in on how we do that. Go ahead, Nathan.
Okay.
And one more. Go ahead. There's some stats, some scriptures of God's calling us, right? God created the heavens and the earth. He's called us to be stewards of His creation. Another word for stewardship is manager. In order to be a manager, you just don't, let it happen. You have to think strategic. You have to think outside the box, and many times, and that's what we're trying to do. We're just trying to be good stewards as God called us to do. Go ahead.
Okay. There we go.
There we go. And you don't have, obviously, if this was more audio, I'd ask for a response, but the question is, and I'll give you a couple seconds to think about it, but which variable has the most impact on a building's energy consumption? Obviously, lead rating is big, HVAC is big, lighting, and then occupant behavior. Lead rating, as it's designed, it makes a big impact. HVAC is typically 30 to 40, sometimes 60%, like in Houston area, of your electric bill. Lighting is usually about 10 to 30% based on what kind of system you have. But occupant behavior impacts everything else. So occupant behavior has the most impact on a building's energy consumption.
And when you say occupant behavior, we're saying what we do in our buildings and how we perceive comfort and things like that, correct? So we're
yes,
talking
how
about
you turn on lights, how you turn on outside air and HVAC, and how you manage your building envelope. It's all behavior related. It's all no cost, low cost. Again, it's easier said than done. I realize that, but hopefully you walk away from this presentation with some good information on that.
Okay.
But yes. Then basically the same thing, which receives the least amount of attention. Many times they'll say, hey guys, I'm involved in energy efficiency, and they'll say, ooh, we just changed our lights to LED, which is excellent. But that's 20%, 30% of your energy footprint, your electric footprint. In my strong opinion, HVAC, is 40% to 60%. But again, behavior impacts everything. So,
okay.
occupant behavior. Next slide. So one of the first things that we need to do, in order to move forward, right? If you build a house, you need to have some kind of footprint, some blueprints, right? And in order to go from point A to point Z right now, or to point A to point B, right now we're in the Rocky Mountains doing a half vacation, half work, and we have this map, and it tells us where to go and what to do and how far to go, and then obviously that helps in a number of ways. And it's the same thing with energy efficiency and energy management. Given that with our churches, we have minimal budgets. We have maybe one facility manager, or maybe we have a pastor that's wearing 5 hats, and part of it is facility manager. It's hard to be proactive on an energy management. So one of the things that we focus on is building a plan or an energy audit.
Okay.
Again, defined real briefly, energy management is the discipline. I say discipline, that's behavior, right? And
Right.
measures executed, again, behavior, to achieve minimum possible energy use and cost while meeting the true needs and comfort of activities occurring within a facility. If you break down, I'm giving you just a rough outline. HVAC is 50 to 60%. Again, that changes based on where you are in the country, but even in Boston and the Northeast, if you're taking all energy, it's still a good 40 to 60% of energy use. Lighting is typically 20 to 30%, and then plug load, things you plug into the wall, is around 20%, 10 to 25%, again, based on where you are.
Okay.
one last quick facts, and then I'll move forward on the energy portion. But houses of worship, if 370,000 congregations within the U.S. cut energy by 20%, we would save nearly 630 million on ministry, missions, education, cut electricity by 3.6 billion kilowatt hours, and I'll talk about that, prevent more than 2.6 billion tons of greenhouse gas emissions, equivalent to 480,000 cars, equivalent to planting over nearly 600,000 trees. And if we were to say the next one, the 30% would equate to $1 billion.
Wow. And
Right,
that's just cutting it by 20%.
Simple 20%.
And then 30% equals $1 billion.
And I think, and I know it's harder said, it's easier said than done, but and I think most of the 20% could be cut through no cost, low cost. And again, I want to talk about strategies to kind of back my point up here shortly. We can move past this slide. Go ahead. I covered that. So I want to briefly walk through two buildings and show you really, I want to walk through the HVAC, lighting, building envelope, and plug load, and just show you the differences. And each one of these sections I could teach a week-long class on. So if this is kind of like drinking out of a fire hose, I apologize. Just trying to give you enough information to kind of buy into this whole idea of energy efficiency.
Okay.
Here's the influencers. You can go past this slide. I'll talk more about that. So here's, many times we see this in Boston, right? And we see this in the South as well, but in church A, more of an inefficient church. What we're looking at is an oil-fired steam boiler, and of course that's an extreme picture right there. Not a lot of people have those, but with a steam system that's that old, at best you're looking at a 50 to 60% efficiency. Okay. But you have to also consider the old pipes. With steam system, I don't know if anybody here has steam, but those steam systems pipes are old, and much of the efficiency is lost through the pipe. So now, if you have an older oil-fired steam system, you're looking at a unit that might be 40 to 50 to 60% efficient. Right off the bat, pipes are old. They leak oil on average is 3 times the cost of gas. It's also constant volume, which means if you want to heat just one room, you have to heat the entire building. A 20-year-old split system at the bottom, if you see those coils, they're crushed in. I see this all the time, and this is a behavior thing. But if up to 10% of the coils on a cooling system are bent in, and I encourage you to go look at them, you can lose up to 30% of the efficiency of that unit.
Wow. Okay.
All right. Go ahead. More of efficient, what we might see, what we encourage churches to look at if they have, they have the funds. And Mark, as I go through this, there's rebates through your utility company that can help to offset a lot of this cost. But a gas-fired forced hot water boiler, it has modular. It might be able to modulate. That means it doesn't have to run constant volume. It can vary based on the demand. It's cleaner fuel. It's 95% efficient. Sounds like I'm selling HVAC equipment. Yeah. I'm a neutral third party, but big believer in that. Go ahead and go to the next one. I'll hit those points here later. Lighting, if you look up at your linear fluorescence, if you have those T12s, which means 12/8 of an inch, those the 40-watt bulbs are going away with those. They don't make them anymore. They still sell some at Home Depot, but they're going to stop selling those. Many people are moving to 32-watt T8s, but those are now seen as a baseline lamp. People are moving over from those to 13 to 16-watt LED linear fluorescence. I'll talk more about that, but one of the things I do see with lighting is when we walk into an office, into a classroom, most of the time, 90% of the time, you're overlit. IESNA, and you can write it down if you want, but they set the standard for light lumens within hallways, within classrooms, etc. What they say for corridors is the foot candles should be 10 to 15. In classrooms, it should be about 40 to 60. Many times we go in and we're seeing 80 to 90 foot candles. In hallways, we're seeing 40 to 50. That just means there's an opportunity to delamp.
Okay.
That's something to look at if you want to do your own self-assessment. Go ahead.
Okay.
LEDs, I won't go through all of these, but They're 6 watts versus 60 watts. They have 50,000 burn hours versus 12,000. $1 a year versus $11 per year. Pretty quick payback. Costs are coming down. Let me say the very bottom line, 23-second rule. Mythbusters, so it has to be correct, right?
Right.
Mythbusters did a study that if you're out of your office longer, or your classroom or bathroom, where longer than 23 seconds, it pays to turn your lights off. So keep
Really?
that in mind. As yeah, church is one thing you can do. You just turn off your lights over every fixture in the church. That encourages people to turn their lights off. That's something they can take home to their workplace, etc.
Okay.
Church envelope, single pane. We see this all the time. A single bad weather stripping under the doors, open doors, poor insulation, leaky roof. The stronger your building envelope, the less energy you're going to use. The more compromises you have in your building envelope, obviously, the more energy you're going to use. And I have an example here on the next slide. So we did a study at Harvard Divinity School in Cambridge a few years ago, and had a thermal imaging scan of their outdoor. If you see the bottom picture, that orange glass, that's a single pane glass versus a double pane. Actually, that's just a single pane with a storm, and you're looking at an 8-degree delta, or an 8-degree difference between the single pane and the single pane with a storm. So if you have single pane, there's a lot of options. I know it costs a little bit more money to do double pane or triple pane, but another option is to do storm windows to help minimize that as much as you can.
So
Consider upgrading weather. Go ahead.
so just with adding a storm window to a single pane window, we're retaining 8 degrees more than where we're not. That's what
Correct.
that's showing? Okay.
The building is maintaining 8 degrees more of the compromised, because you see that heat escaping, because it was obviously colder, so they were trying to maintain a
Hmm.
68-degree indoor temperature. But when you have a single pane window, it compromises the envelope, and it moves out accordingly.
Okay. Great.
Here's just an example, and y'all can look at this if you download the slides. But there's
Okay.
just some examples to look at for envelope. Plug load, plug the things you plug into the wall. I will say that 75% of plug load is phantom load. Up to 75% of plug load is phantom load, which means when the device is off, it's still using current, still drawing energy. So there are options. You can get plug load adapters at Walmart. If you have offices within your church, maybe buy 5 or 6 just to test it, and put them in the offices, and they plug the computers into the plug load adapters. You can plug the coffee machine, coffee maker, etc. Another thing I'll point out at the bottom, it says location thermostats or under thermostats. Many times thermostats are located on an exterior wall, or they're located above a copy machine, a coffee machine, a printer. Well, that rejects heat and causes the thermostat to misread. So watch the location of your thermostats.
Okay.
We can move forward on that one. So behavior controls, just a few things, and I think I go through these a little bit more on other slides, but behavior and controls, zoning actually gets that on the next slide. Deadband, the second one, is something to keep. If you're looking at your thermostat, if your cooling set point is set at 72 degrees, your heating set point is set at 70 degrees, typically each set point has a 2-degree differential. So if you only have a 2-degree deadband, more than likely you're having simultaneous heating and cooling because you have overlap of the set points. So what I encourage a lot of churches to do is either use heating or cooling only, or in between months, have a 5 to 6 degree deadband.
Okay.
Setback, go ahead.
So just to help clarify, instead of using the auto setting on your thermostat, when it's typically all you're calling for is cooling, use cooling only. If it's in the winter months, heat only,
If possible.
if possible. And then the transitional times,
Mm-hmm.
have a 5 to 6 degree different. So a cooling set point, if you had a cooling set point of 72, then we'd be looking at a 64 or so
Or
in that.
66, yeah, 66
Okay,
degree. Yes, sir. Mhm.
but not 2 degrees like we've both seen a lot of, heating to 68, and like you said, 68 and 70, we see that heat and cool set. But when it's in auto mode in that 2 degree dead band, and that's the dead band is the fluctuation between set points that the system
Yes,
allows for
yes.
that.
And many times that when we see that is we see churches with maybe 30 or 40 programmable or conventional thermostats, and they're prone to user error, which means they're decentralized, and it's really hard to go on a daily basis or a weekly basis to go and change every set point. Obviously, a very big believer in a centralized, so like Wi-Fi enabled thermostats or
Mhm.
direct digital controls, which are more expensive. On average, it's $1 a square foot, where you're looking at $300 to $500 for a Wi-Fi enabled thermostat with software. So any
Mhm.
way you can centralize your scheduling, centralize your controls as much as possible, you're making your job much easier to control the largest energy using products, right? The HVAC uses 40 to 60%. So if you can get good control of your HVAC, then that's more than half the battle. So I'm a big believer. Again, I don't sell thermostats, but I'm again neutral third party here, but I'm a big believer in it because it equips you to make better decisions.
Okay.
Let me say one last thing on the adjusting temperature set point. One, I say 1% change. 1 degree change can save 1.5% on the HVAC portion of your bill. So going from an average of 70-degree cooling to 72-degree cooling can have a 3% impact on the HVAC portion of your bill. So again, be as aggressive as you can on that.
Okay.
Go ahead. I talked about simultaneous heating and cooling. I do want to talk about zoning. If you have the ability to zone, obviously it makes sense, right?
Right.
Many times we'll go into a school, we'll go into a church where just the pastor or the principal will come into his or her office and turn on the entire chiller just to operate and just to condition that one room. So there's a number of ways around that. One option obviously being is if you have the ability to zone, then minute or maximize the zoning as much as possible. If you don't and you have one large chiller for your entire church, one thing to look at is adding a independent split system or air conditioning unit just over those offices. We just did an energy audit at a large Baptist church in Richmond, Virginia, and they had a 134-ton cooling unit operating 6 offices, but it was also part of the children's room. So every day they were turning on 134 tons of chiller capacity, which cost them $35,000 a year. If they're able to replace that and minimize the use of that chiller only to when it's needed for the children's ministry, which I think was 2 days a week, and maybe install 6 VRF, which is variable refrigerant flow, that would cost them about $6,000 to install and only cost them $1,500 a year in energy to use. So you're looking at almost a $28,500 difference in that strategy. So again, just thinking outside the box. Let
Sure.
me say one more, on this kind of a rabbit trail, but if you have a small meeting, like you have a 30 or 4 person meeting, be very considerate of where you have that meeting. Again, having a meeting where it's a 30-ton unit versus where it's a 3-ton unit, that's going to make a big energy impact. So be strategic on where you set your meetings and your ministry meetings, et cetera, et cetera. So again, just thinking outside the box.
Okay.
Here's more. I won't go through all of. I went through a lot of these already. Unoccupied set points. EPA recommends 85 for cooling, 55 for heating. Your facility managers know your buildings better than everybody else, right?
Right.
So, but if there's a compromise, like in Salt Lake City, we do a lot of evangelical churches up there. Many set points go from 68 heating to 65, and they just drop 3 degrees. Well, that's still causing your heating system to run 24 hours a day to maintain 65, because in Salt Lake City, at night it gets to below 20 many times. So being strategic on that intersection. Again, you know your building better than I do, than any of us do. So if there's compromise, even to drop it from 65 to 62 or 65 to 60, be as aggressive as you possibly can on those.
Okay. So when you're talking about the unoccupied times, the encouragement is to give as much range as you can, and perhaps maybe step it up if you need to sooner, but drop it to those big ranges at night when no one's in the building anyway.
Yeah, right. You want to minimize use of HVAC in a healthy way. That's healthy for the building. That's healthy for the equipment.
Okay.
So if you're using if you're trying to keep a safe set point on the worship center, right? That worship center is probably cooled or heated by very large units. If you're maintaining a 65-degree, unoccupied set point, especially in colder areas, that's going to cause those larger units to heat continuously throughout the day. While dropping them, lower is going to minimize the use of that equipment.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. We talked about.
Yeah, we talked about a lot of that. Let's keep moving forward for time's sake.
Okay.
That's okay. Now benchmarking. All right, this is the other part. I think this is the other half of the battle, right? Benchmarking is, right, how can we move forward if we don't know where we have been? Obviously, one of the most important parts of our jobs. And I'll describe that and give you some examples here. 2 questions. How are we doing? How do we know? But simply, benchmarking is the process of comparing your energy performance to something similar. And as an example, it's like a gas gauge to a car, right? When you see what you have in the tank, you make better informed decisions. Poor wife, her gas gauge broke, and we just didn't want to spend $1,000 to fix it. Maybe we should, but she's run out of gas 2 or 3 times already because she doesn't see what she has in the tank. And it's the same mindset with energy. When we see where we've been, when we see where we have gone, especially in demand and consumption, which I will define here shortly, it impacts the way we use energy because we can identify peaks, errors, valleys, and more. It's so important. I'll talk about Portfolio Manager, which is a free software from the EPA, and I actually define some of this here in the next few slides. Go ahead. Okay, let's move past these next 2. It's okay, and yeah, keep moving forward. Yeah, right here. Here's an example. Go back to that graph. Here's an example of a school we did in Houston, Texas we did the audit during the summer months. But notice the months at the bottom: January, February, March, April. Well, we know there's still school in May. Well, there's not school in these particular dates in June and July and August, but that's the peak of the energy use during that time. So what's going on June, July, and August? Again, the graph told me so much. So now I, as an energy manager, or somebody interested in energy at the church, now I can go back and start to investigate. Well, this particular church, what they were doing during peak time, and I think the next slide will define what peak demand is, but during the peak demand between the hours of 2 p.m. and the hours of 6 p.m., what they had is they had all the outside air dampers open, which they had that hot, humid Houston air coming into the building. Well, what you have to do is you have to dehumidify that, or you're going to have humidity issues within the building. So you drop the temperature to below 32 to wring all the moisture out, and then you have to reheat it to set point. Well, what we did is we closed all the outside air dampers because you don't need it when nobody's in the building, and we dehumidified. Instead of 2 to 6, we dehumidified for an hour in the morning. So that one behavior change saved that campus $45,000 in 1 year, and it was simple. It was a no-cost change.
Okay.
So as part of that, the understanding your electricity, again, it's half the battle. And I know, I'm sorry if I'm going so fast. It's just a lot of information. Anything we're talking about, we could spend a week on. Sure. But typically, on average, your utility bill is broken up into 2 parts. If you're in a competitive market, what you have is your retail electric provider, and that your total kilowatt hours times whatever the rate is, 3 cents. I've seen it as high as 21 cents in Alaska. Then you can negotiate that part if you're competitive. But you also have transmission and distribution. You cannot negotiate on that part. It's just what it is. It's the transmission and distribution. And cost of making the energy is passed to the client, pretty much. And it's broken up into a number of different things.
Okay.
But two things I want you to walk away with is what is kilowatt hours and what is kilowatts. Kilowatt hours is basically the kilowatts measured over a 30-day cycle. It's the consumption or the amount of energy you use, right, during the 30-day period.
Okay.
Kilowatts is the rate at which you use electricity. For example, if I had a 2 horsepower motor versus a 10 horsepower motor, and they both used 1,000 kilowatts, right? They're both going to use the same amount of consumption, but the 10 horsepower, the rate at which it uses is a lot faster than the 2 horsepower motor, if that makes sense. So utility company is going to charge and pass forward the rate at which you use energy, and they measure that in something that we call kilowatts or demand. So if we break our month into 15-minute increments, interval data is what they call it, IDR meters. But what they do is they take your highest 15-minute period, and that is what they charge you. Many, like in Houston, they have 4 different types. They charge you a monthly peak demand, they charge you a summer peak demand, and then they charge you an annual peak demand. So if I say I average 200 kilowatts every 15-minute period, then one day I turn everything on during a hot day, all the lights, all the HVAC, and I go from 200 to 350, even for one 15-minute period. They're charging you the 315, not the 200 or even the average. They're charging you the 315. So how and when you use your electric equipment makes a huge impact.
Okay.
So that's a lot of information there. Nathan, did you want to say anything or clarify anything on that portion?
So yeah, so when we talk the demand charge, because we get asked this a lot, I know you get asked a lot, and it's a big number. Um, like you said, so that 15 minutes. So if you on Sunday morning, and probably if I asked, half of the room would raise their hands. On Sunday morning, a lot of us turn on all of the ACs and the lights when we open the building, first thing Sunday morning. But
Yep.
so for that moment of time, because every motor is starting up, every light is kicking on, every ballast, the amount of energy it takes to start everything is going to spike. And so
Yes.
that moment in time, that 15 minutes on a Sunday morning, that high spike, which is unusual because we typically don't need the whole building the rest of the week, that's setting, though, what the utility company is charging us for our kilowatt hour usage. Am I
Correct.
saying that right? Okay. And
Yes.
and so that's the difference, where that moment of demand is setting the price for our usage for the rest of the month or the rest of the year. Because that demand, how long can they charge you that high peak demand?
Typically, the peak demand is typically between the hours of 2 p.m. and 6 p.m. during the summer months of
Mhm.
May through August. So
Okay.
how you use electric equipment between those hours and between those months can make a big impact.
Okay.
And then I'll just use one more example to add some clarity to it. We were doing another church or a school in Houston. There's a large high school, and it was in August. Obviously, football in Texas is a real big deal. I don't know if you guys knew that. Uh, Joking here, but it was 3 o'clock, and all the chillers were running. The football field meter was connected to the high school meter, so there was only one meter. Well, the maintenance man just wanted to get his duties and his checklist over with real quick, so he went ahead, and 3 o'clock he turned on all the football field lights on while the school was still in session. So not only do you have that high energy use of the chillers and the indoor lights of the high school, now on top of that, you have the football field lights on. So what he did with that one practice is he set his annual peak demand, not only his monthly, but his monthly, his summer, and his ratchet demand. And that one practice ended up costing them, I think, that school $25,000. So
Wow.
the amount of energy you use and the rate at which you use it is so important in regards to energy management and energy efficiency.
Okay.
There's just an example of what we were seeing. Of that previous graph I showed you. Their June, July, and August dipped quite a bit, and they were able, just during the summer months, the cost went from $80,000 to $40,000 through that one practice, because it had a domino effect on the 4 different types of demand and the consumption. And again, it was no cost change, and you don't know that unless you can benchmark and unless you can have the time to investigate, which is an energy audit.
Okay.
So I think this is the last slide I have, and it's Portfolio Manager. If you haven't seen it, it's a free program. EPA started, actually, it's not a free program. You already paid for it through your energy efficient or through your taxes, but there's no additional money on top of it. It really is a great program. You can benchmark any building you want for however long you want. You can benchmark and input electric cost, electric kWh, demand, which is kW, water, gas, wastewater. You can set goals. If you have a green team or a facility team that helps make the decision, this is an excellent thing that they can do to kind of say, hey, where are we cost-wise on energy? Where are we use-wise? Well, let's set some goals to see if we can get to a certain benchmark, and this is the way you can track it in certain ways. And I think y'all do some of that, Nathan, and we do it as well if y'all need some help with it.
Yes, and we will actually, we are anticipating in December actually having a representative from Energy Star who represents
Jerry Lawson.
Yep,
Yeah.
for houses of worship to actually talk and speak to us. So absolutely, because like you said, how do you know where you can improve if you don't know what you're doing?
Yep, no, it really is. I mean, it's there already. You don't have to, spend money on the, real extravagant. Some I still encourage them to, because there's more to it, like maintenance calls, like school dude maintenance calls, etc. But if you're just trying to benchmark your utility and set goals, this is an excellent program to have.
Okay. And then
I think
we got one last slide.
Okay, yeah, that's just some inspirational stuff. But the bottom line is, with energy efficiency, there's a lot of potential. We've seen a lot of potential. The deeper we get involved into this intersection of faith and just energy management, the more passionate we become, because we see such a huge tie in the way we operate our building, just good stewardship and the domino effect good stewardship could have, not just on, our specific church building, but, we could take it home with us. This, we use, the other half of what we do is missions, and we'll go and we'll work with churches. The money they save, we'll redirect to businesses that we have in Kenya, Congo, India, and a few other places. Are just what's poured in, we want to pour out. And
Sure.
I think that same mindset can be said, that there's a huge intersection. And just when we explore solar, how solar can be used as a preventative tool, as an educational tool, as a business in India and Congo, but through the local church. Again, everything we desire to do, we want to invest into the local church so the local church can be a blessing in their community. So that's the heart behind where we are and what we want to do.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Everybody, I've got some questions already, but now is our time. It's a lot of information. Ask your questions. We're going to start answering some of the ones I've got, but please submit some more questions. What would you like some more clarification? And I'll just start asking you, Colby, some of the questions that have come in. So we talked about the T12s, and you mentioned they're not being produced, manufactured anymore. Do we have a hard date when we're not even going to get them available, or is it kind of whenever they're done, they're done?
Yeah, well, we had a hard date 3 years ago, and I think obviously there's been pushback on that, but they don't manufacture them in the U.S. anymore, to my knowledge. And I believe, and they said, I think by 2015 they were going to stop selling them, obviously, but still, a lot of people still have T12s.
Right.
So if you don't plan on retrofitting T12s I would go and stock up.
Yeah.
Just that's what I would encourage you to do because you never know. It's going to be
Yeah.
harder and harder. I would say within 5 years.
Okay. And keeping in mind when we're talking about the T12s, obviously we get that the bulb is an issue, but it's the ballast too. When you're comparing a T12 ballast, which is generally magnetic, versus a
Electromagnetic.
versus a T8 ballast or T5, or which is uh, electronic. There we go. That's the word.
Yeah.
There's additional efficiencies. It's not just the lamp that's inefficient in a T12 system, the ballast itself. So all of that combined, you're spending a lot more money keeping a T12 going than any other system. You're not saving it by not changing it out.
Hmm.
So and you can do that. And if y'all need to know how you just need to switch out some ballast and make it a T8 at the very least, you can keep the same troffer, just swap out the ballast.
Yep. Electromagnetic is, it impacts behavior, in a number of ways. And I would say too, if you have 32-watt T8, you could look into LED plug and plays, which means
Mhm.
you don't have to change the ballast. You don't even have to bypass the ballast, although it is recommended. But we
Right.
just had a client, Academy, just did plug and plays on all 200 stores, and they replaced all 32-watt T8 bulbs with 14-watt LED equivalents, and they didn't even change the fixture. They just took the ballast, took the bulb out, and put an LED bulb in. So
Wow.
there are cost-effective ways to do that. And you can go buy an LED bulb for $5 to $10 at Home Depot, or
Right.
something to consider.
Okay. So is there a concern, or how do we calculate the savings offset of shutting off the AC systems in areas that may have temperature extremes that could damage other equipment, like in worship centers or grand pianos, things like that? Obviously, we don't want them to get too humid,
And
too hot, or too cold. Um, is it
good
just
question.
best practices, or how do we kind of approach that?
That's a great question. Again, I would defer to your facility manager on that question. But we do it all the time, and with you have to. So we just did a big Baptist church in Dallas, and they had a large organ. They were having humidity issues, so they kept those two large chillers that would operate that at 72 degrees, just as a means to keep humidity at a certain percentage. But there's internal. If you have a big organ or piano, there's internal humidity aspects that you can add to it. Or something to consider is if you have, again, it's hard to know unless you have somebody come do an energy audit, right? But
Right.
if you have two large chillers, typically those are funneled to an air handling unit, and those air handling units to VAV, or variable air volume boxes. You can add internal cooling or DX coils to an air handler that would allow just the air handler serving the worship center to run while you can keep the chiller off, or in modulating mode, if that makes sense. But the payback, I mean, I hear you. You don't want to damage other equipment, right?
But it's about exploring, like you said, thinking outside, exploring. If we're worried about it being too humid and affecting a grand piano, which is a concern, maybe that's when we work with our HVAC contractor and get a smaller system that is focused just in that area, or an internal dehumidification device in or
Yeah.
around the piano. So it's
Yes.
worth it, because a solution there, kind of like you said, if it costs us $10,000 to run this equipment, but we can install a solution that's much more efficient for $4,000, we're already saving money.
And yeah, yeah. And many times there's a compromise point too. You don't have to keep the thermostat set at 70 degrees. Maybe if you have a humidity sensor and you can keep the humidity below, or many times you need to keep the humidity above, right? But there is a humidity sensor that I keep the temperature at 75 instead of 70, or
Yep.
78. As long as the humidity is below a certain point, then I keep it at that set point.
Okay. Do it by humidity, not temperature.
Yeah, I don't even know if I'm answering their question. It's
I th-
such
I,
there's I hear your concern, and I definitely agree
yeah.
with that. You have to be careful.
Yep. Okay. And fixing bent coils, that's you can get coil combs at any
$10.
HVAC supply store. Many home stores will sell them, and they're just fixed metal combs that are
Mm-hmm.
have different spacing based on your coils. And it can be tedious, but literally you start at the top and just comb your way down and it will straighten those fins. But I,
Mhm.
I would say 30 minutes spent straightening the fins on your unit can increase your efficiency. It makes it well worth it.
Sometimes the coils are so far beyond repair, but the combs are usually about $10.
Yep.
And if you're by the coast, you need to be real careful about kind of rust going on and deteriorating the coils of the HVAC unit. So there is
Yep.
some pre-treatment that's needed on
Okay.
chillers by the coast.
Right. And hail guards, if you're in an area,
Oh, amen.
you can get hail guards for equipment. Every manufacturer will make hail guards for every piece of outdoor equipment they sell.
I would
Uh,
spec that on every, yeah, I would spec that on every new equipment. Absolutely.
okay. The name of the device that stops the phantom load, and what was that again?
Plug load adapter.
Okay.
You
Plug
can just Google,
load adapter.
yeah, just plug, you can go get it at Walmart for 10, 20 bucks. It can be super fancy that you can get one that looks like, a typical outlet and that will connect into, that's smart and that can connect into a software on your phone. If you want to get it that aggressive, you can. Obviously, that's more expensive. Or you can just get a plug load adapter that will cut the phantom load off, and you can buy it at Walmart. But plug load adapter is what I would look at.
Okay. Um, and then some practical tips. So again, behavioral change and utility usage. Is there some quick and easy ways to help explain it? I think you mentioned one, like put a sticker at every switch, turn off when you leave the room. Is there some other things that we can encourage our folks to do?
Yep. If you have individual thermostats, obviously put a big sign on there that encourages staff to turn it back. If you don't have centralized control, or if it's not programmable until you can buy one, I would encourage just putting nameplates over thermostats and even show them what the cost could be if you have the ability to do that. Say, hey, by running this HVAC for this amount of time, this is what we're spending. By changing it or adjusting it, we can recapture this amount of money.
Okay.
So maybe that's one option. Keeping doors open is another option. Uh, Obviously, doors open allow that the air. Exhaust fans is another thing that keeps that just takes that conditioned air and pumps it out of the building, or it brings it in. Um, Domestic hot water tanks, I'd even mention that. If you have an electric domestic hot water tank, if you think about it, you're maintaining 120 to 140 degree water 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, just to provide hot water for Sunday mornings. So I highly encourage time clocks if you can, because that would save on the life of the equipment, and it would save energy dollars.
Right. So don't run them when you don't need them. Turn the temperature down if you don't really need that hot of a water. I heard one from the church. One of the gentlemen that's part of the National Association of Church Facility Managers was in one of their talks or listening to one of their sessions, and he mentioned a time clock on the water fountains. He
Yep.
did that in his building because why was he cooling the water in the middle of the night when nobody was there? Um,
Vending
so
machines as well.
yeah.
Look up
So
if you have vending machines. Look up vending miser. That's something to look into as well.
okay. Um, we talked a little bit about converting, like I mentioned, T12 to T8. Um, do we have options to convert a T12 fixture to LED? Are they making those?
Yes, absolutely. To convert a T12 to LED, you have to change the entire ballast. You have to go from electromagnetic ballast to more of an LED driver. So
Okay.
if you have a 3-lamp T8, or excuse me, a 3-lamp T8 or a three lamp T12, probably costs about $80 to $90 to change that out completely
Okay.
per fixture, and I know that adds up.
Yeah.
There's
So
cheaper options, but yeah.
yeah. So you can leave the troffer itself, the covers and stuff, but you're removing that old ballast, T12 ballast, and putting an LED driver, normally a direct wire
Mm-hmm.
to the ballast or
And that,
driver, and then to your LED.
yeah. And that $70 to $90 per fixture, that's installed cost from a third-party contractor. If you wanted to do it in-house, obviously, you could cut that price in half.
Okay. Talked about Sunday morning light, HVA turn on cost, reviewing that. And when we were talking about that, we were talking about demand, and I was using it as a typical example of how churches we tend to set our demand on a Sunday morning.
Yes.
And so to combat that spike, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's when we might look at not, one, opening the building, but not turning on all the lights, only turning on the lights that you absolutely need to see to unlock the building. And don't start your HVAC units at the same time. Stage them at least 30 minutes if we can. Is that fair? 15,
Yeah,
20?
I mean, yeah, I would stagger, and I wouldn't turn them on at midnight unless you have to. Many times
Okay.
they'll turn our chillers on at midnight in order to get church ready for 8 a.m. service.
Mm-hmm.
Can you start them at 4 a.m.? And stagger start in a smart way. Many times stagger start can work in a bad way because you're impacting demand more than you are consumption. But I think stagger start every 30 minutes, if you can do that, is great.
Okay. And like I say, if we don't need it, don't turn it on.
Or keep it in unoccupied set point mode. Yeah. And maybe you have three, maybe you have night unoccupied temperature, which is at 55 for heating, and then maybe unoccupied during the day could be 60. Then occupied could be a 68 or.
Okay.
So, every church is so unique that it takes, I can give you typical generic ideas, but it really takes, your own staff to kind of look at it with unique eyes and then strategize and come up with a game plan accordingly.
Okay. Question of best resource locally to contact in order to identify the best ways to be energy efficient. What's the best? What are some local contacts?
So if you want, free contacts, many times your utility company will do a free energy audit for you. It's really like an ASHRAE level 1. So it's just still it'll give you some good ideas. I would be careful on many times if you have a third party, another company come in to do an audit, like a lighting contractor or a HVAC contractor, even though they're good, it's not third party. It's good to get a neutral third party to come and look and give you, options on cost and ideas. But a local utility company, many times they'll do free or cheap energy audits. If you want a more in-depth audit, there's our firm, there's a firm called Ideal Impact, there's your firm, there's other firms out there.
Okay. So we can always, reach out to our local utilities, local even contractors to start and to answer those questions. And Energy Star, you mentioned that, and we talked about at the end, that Energy Star for Houses of Worship has a ton of information on being energy efficient, and we all paid for it. So yes. You already paid to have all that resources and research done. So take advantage of that. Here's a question: are 360-degree LED tub lights being made? Tube lights. So I'm assuming LED light, like a corncob lamp, because I've seen corncob lamps.
Say that again. 360.
Yeah, 360 LED. I'm thinking it's supposed to be tube lights. So let me clarify that question. Let me get some clarification. Let's go to this next one. Should we benchmark first through Energy Star and then get an energy audit?
Yes, and benchmarking is part of an energy audit too.
Okay.
It's like our firm will benchmark, for 3 years of data, or you can do it yourself. You can just easily input your electric bills into Portfolio Manager.
Okay.
But I highly recommend that you do it first. I mean, when we do an audit, we always benchmark first. So if you're gonna, benchmark yourself and do your own energy assessment, then yes, benchmark first.
Okay. When we're looking at ROI, is there a range that makes sense? What's the cutoff point? 18 months, yes, sure. But if it's a 20, 25 year, do you have a kind of a generic rule of thumb on that?
Yes. First off, your utility company offers excellent rebates. Well, many of them, not everyone, offers excellent rebates that would offset lighting. Like if you're in Massachusetts, they'll pay for 80 to 90% of your lighting cost. And in the South, they spend more money and give you more money on HVAC. They can offset 20 to 30% of the cost. But I would say for lighting, 5 years or less is a really good earmark. If you're looking more at 5 to 10 year mark for LED lighting, maybe get a third party to kind of just analyze that to make sure you're comfortable with it. On HVAC, anything under 10 years is great. It really is. If you're in Houston, the cost of energy is so low that it's hard to have a 10-year payback. So maybe a 15-year payback or less is good. Many times though, you have an old chiller, you just don't have a choice. You just need to replace it, and you're looking at a 20 to 30-year payback. And it is what it is. There's options to, offset the cost with rebates and with some lower cost options up there. But I would say 12-year and under for HVAC, 5-year under for lighting.
Okay.
And controls, if you're doing Wi-Fi enabled thermostats, typically those can pay for themselves really quick, year, 2 years or less. And I always put that at the top of the list.
Okay. And keeping in mind on HVAC as well, you have the estimated return that you can calculate. Mm-hmm. But when you're replacing an old piece of equipment with something that's new and way more efficient, you may find that your ROI is actually sooner because you're able to, for example, put the set points up higher because the equipment is more efficient, taking more of the humidity out of the air during operation, things like that.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And when you're looking at equipment, don't forget, we talked about in the early examples of leaking gas steam lines, but same thing with ducts. Ducts age, so there's air loss there. So look at that too when you're looking at changing out HVAC while you're already up there working. Check to make sure the ducts are still in good shape. Yes, sorry, I just wanted to throw that out there. So on the LED tubes, have you seen them manufacturing LED tubes that have LED strips all the way around so that it shines multi-directional? So they are making those.
Gotcha. Yep. Yeah, because LED is a directional light, so you have to have a number of different LED, the diodes, to have some kind of comfortable lighting. So yeah, the 360 LED, I see what you're saying. So yeah. You don't want to be careful though. If there's a 360, you don't want unnecessary light to shine up. We call that upshining lights, and it doesn't give you good task level lighting, and it's just a waste of energy. So downward facing directional lights for LEDs is what we recommend. If it's a recessed fixture.
Okay. Question about single pane to double pane. Is there kind of a range of potential energy savings by switching that out when you go from a single to a double?
Yeah. I mean, you can look from $500 to $1,500 per window because it's based on how is the architecture. Do they have to remove the window pane itself? So there's a lot of different things to take into consideration there. But I would say for a window, 5 to 10 year payback, just because the cost can be that high. But again, how much cooling are you using? How much heating are you using? It's based on where you are in the country. But if you can find a 5 year or less, I think that's pretty excellent.
Yeah, and it's energy loss through the window that you're saving, and it's also perceived comfort on the inside because you don't have the cold spots in front of all your windows. Correct. Or heat spots. Yep. So that's that cascade effect we've been talking about. I have a question here. What can you do with a refrigerator that doesn't have a whole lot in it?
That excellent question. Because if you have a refrigerator with one item in it, you're using more energy just to maintain the temperature of that one item, opposed to a full refrigerator doesn't use as much energy. There's some articles on that on Energy Star or EPA if y'all wanted to take a look. Obviously, the best way to do it is consolidating all the refrigerators to one refrigerator, moving to a mini fridge. Although if every room had a mini fridge, I would kind of push back on that. But That's a great question. Increase the setting instead of having it at extra cold. Maybe move it up to cold. If you don't want to invest, or if you don't have the ability to consolidate refrigerators, that's an option. That's a no cost option to look at, and that makes a difference.
Yeah. So yeah, either and every time you replace an appliance, buy an appliance, it should be Energy Star.
Energy Star. Agree. Agreed.
Um, and then last question that I'm kind of seeing here is, can we dim LED and still maintain good color rendering as we go? Because we're recommending LED lights, and churches like to dim them and lower them. I've seen if you invest in the technology, they are getting even better technology with dimmable LEDs that maintain color rendering. They're more expensive,
I,
but
yes, I see. Go ahead. Sorry.
I'll just say they're more expensive, but you are getting that extended life and that extended use and less energy consumption.
Yes, churches, especially in the worship centers, one reason churches don't go LEDs because they don't have the dimmability. Uh, sometimes they have minimal dimmability, but not to the degree that churches like. But the technology, just like you said, they now have that 0 to 100 dimmability factor. They are more expensive, but that cost over the years will go down.
Right. All right. Well, we are hitting top of the mark, top of the hour. Colby, I appreciate your time, especially knowing that you're out there in Colorado enjoying time. So we thank you for coming in and speaking with us, everyone. It will be we will get this on the website. We will make the slide deck available for download. Give us a little bit of time to do that. But Colby, again, thank you very much. I appreciate you being here. And I've got no other questions, and we will see you all next month as we start talking about outside vendors. But thank you all for being here. Appreciate it. Have a blessed rest of the week.